But, then later Ruby Frank's sitting there in the courtroom and now she's saying these terrible things about this child. It's totally coordinated.
I was not planning on coming forward to the media other than just doing the podcast interview. Is when I heard that Ruby accused her child of this.
I've had so many questions about this Daily Mail article that's been circulating around since last week. It's about the hearing that took place where Ruby Franke made allegations about her kids. As I mentioned a couple times before, I wanted to wait until Court TV or maybe Law and Crime made mentions of this to even talk about it. Law and Crime recently did make some references to it, and I finally get the answers to the questions that I had bubbling over my head, such as, why did no one else report on this? This is a juvenile hearing procedure. Who had access to it? Was it leaked somehow? Is it from a reliable source? Or is this just like tabloid fodder? Now, I watched this interview that Jessi Weaver did of Ruby Franke's husband's lawyer, and it answers a lot of questions that I had. For example, this clip it right here.
Well, because it occurred during juvenile court proceedings, the reporter who snuck into the proceedings and reported that damaged these children and this family even more. It was despicable.
Someone snuck into these juvenile court proceedings that are probably normally closed to the public and leaked the story out. Having these allegations out there in the public from their potential abuser or abusers, Ruby and Jodi Hildebrandt, it's just awful. I can't even imagine as a kid. I mean, they probably don't know about this yet, but someday when they grow up in the future, they're going to learn about all this. And to have this out there in the public, and even though there wasn't a specific name mentioned, people are going to be pointing fingers at which child it was. Since these allegations have been out, Jodi Hildebrandt survivors have came out to talk about this because they know what it feels like to be on the other end with Jodi Hildebrandt pointing their finger at them and making untrue statements. And that's one of the reasons why they want to speak out about this, because these are patterns that Jodi Hildebrandt has employed before during her therapy sessions.
And again, the only reason why I'm coming forward, I was not planning on coming forward to the media other than just doing the podcast interview, is when I heard that Ruby accused her child of this, and I just hope that this can give the public some context and some clarity of what is happening and why they should not believe her.
They're coordinating this. Of course, both women show they fight fear with fear. Like there's these terrible allegations, and they both show how scared they are. They both show they're scared and they have medical issues. And first it's Jodi who says these children are basically says that they're sexually abusive, so that, desperate reasons for why a parent would try to duct tape some kids. And then later, Jodi, and she usually doesn't have herself say the statements, which was unusual about these records I have. She usually has the sick client say the radical statements for her. But, then later Ruby Frank's sitting there in the courtroom and now she's saying these terrible things about this child. It's totally coordinated. It's totally Jodi's the ringleader. She's coached women through this process probably 100 times.
When I read the police arrest affidavit, Jodi Hildebrandt didn't make a statement at all. Neither did Ruby. The only thing that Jodi said to the cops was, this child cannot be around other kids. This was again echoed by Ruby Franke, apparently, in the juvenile hearing. So I can totally see it as a way of covert manipulation. She's already being accused of something so heinous, so now she's trying to rebut these allegations.
First, Jodi yelled at when the police arrested her. She's smart, right? She's been through the legal stuff, coaching women how to do this forever. Her attorneys don't make a statement. She won't make a statement. She gets arrested, and then she says, don't let any other children be around those children ever, which infers sexual abuse when you look at tiny little kids that aren't violent. So I mean, here's this person found red-handed guilty of child abuse, and the whole world's listening to her because they are subconsciously manipulated by Jodi Hildebrandt. And just Jodi wants to create a situation where she's done this terrible crime, but she wants to create a situation where people see a reason why she had no other choice but to do this crime.
And we have eerily similar tactics that Jodi Hildebrandt has used on her victims, and same with Ruby Franke's children.
while living with Jodi, I experienced being tied. I experienced being duct taped. I experienced being blindfolded. I experienced severe isolation.
And also forcing her patients to be secluded from other people and to poison the well to the point where other people are fearing these individuals. What a way to isolate them.
I experienced the being told I shouldn't be around other people, being told that I was dangerous to be around. People were afraid of me to the point where I was afraid of myself.
And our marriage wasn't in a condition of needing to be saved until this point. And then Jodi was instructing Morwenna that my wife, Morwenna, that because I was the sexual addict, that because of all this stuff, she needed to break the relationship. And she started instructing her that we couldn't talk. So we could only talk in group. And through her, we couldn't talk together. And she followed it. And she was
You mean in private?
Yeah, we
Like
couldn't
at
talk
home?
in our home, that we had to just be in home.
Apparently, Ruby Franke gave Kevin Franke a call because she knew that the cops were going to come after her.
And how did he find out? He found out on the news? Did someone call him?
He got a call from Ruby.
He got a call from Ruby Franke.
Correct.
You mean while
yeah,
after she was arrested?
Before.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. She had heard what was going on and knew they were coming for her and called him.
So in other words, you're saying she knew the police were coming to arrest her. She calls Kevin to say, take care of the kids. How did she know the police were coming? Because again, the reporting indicates is that her son had escaped that house and called and went to a neighbor, and that's when the authorities were alerted. Do you know how she knew they were coming?
I would never want to predict anything that she might know. Kevin doesn't know. He doesn't know. I don't know.
When we first heard about this, a lot of us has questions like, where was he? How did he not know about any of this? And I'm so glad that Jessi Weber does such a good job at asking such good, hard-hitting questions because he does not hold back. Jessi Weber is now on my radar because I love the way that he does these interviews. Vinnie Politan's good too, but man, Jessi Weber's doing such a good job.
They were separated, I read, for 13 months, so they weren't living with each other. How much was he seeing the kids?
Almost not at all. Actually, not at all.
Why is that? Why is that?
Because she told him it was better that they needed to work on their marriage and needed to keep their family together, but that everything was better off with him not in the home and not communicating with the children.
If you can, why were they separated? What was the catalyst?
I probably shouldn't go into that. That's pretty private.
Mm-hmm.
But let's just say they had a difference of opinion.
Parenting? I know you can't talk about it, but is it that kind of where we're going?
Correct.
Okay. What a lot of people are looking at this and they're wondering, well, what did he know? So he might have been living separately from her for 13 months, but he wasn't calling the kids, checking in on the kids, seeing how they're doing. He's the father.
I totally understand.
Now, initially, when I first heard about this, I believe it was stated on his side that the kids were with Ruby for the summertime. But I don't know, based on this interview, it kind of seems like he may have not seen the kids at all for 13 months. So it wasn't just the kids being at her place for the summertime.
That was the big question on my mind and the big question on a lot of people. If you've read everything that's in the media, he's getting raked over the coals for that. But what people don't understand is that he was trying to preserve his marriage. He was taking direction from her. She's the one who asked him to leave the house and indicating that in order for him.
And this part right here kind of echoes what Adam Steed was saying in his interview. You know, you have a man here who's working on his marriage and he wants to do whatever he can to make sure the marriage is preserved. However, his wife is being controlled by Jodi Hildebrandt. Now, I don't know if it's the same thing that's going on here with Ruby Franke and Kevin Franke, but I'm just pointing out some of the similarities that I see. Again, there's so much more that we don't know. I'm just observing some of the similarities potentially. I mean, it's also possible that Kevin Franke heard about some of the Jodi Hildebrandt's victims and was like, oh, this might be a good opportunity to point my finger at Jodi. But we don't know.
Ruby Franke told Kevin that, you know, it's better off he's not part of the home. and that he lived separately from them and not to have any contact. He just took that as, okay, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Or did she prevent him in any way from seeing the kids? Did he want to see them and talk to them, and she told him no?
Emotionally, she was controlling him because she knew how much he valued their marriage and valued their family, and it was his desire to be able to get back with the family and preserve his marriage. So he was taking direction from her, and her direction was, it's so much better off, and I think we can salvage our.
So we have Kevin Franke here pointing the finger at Ruby Franke. However, at some point, they're going to ultimately shift the blame onto Jodi Hildebrandt and I guess paint her as like a master manipulator. Now, when I first heard some of the interviews that Kevin Franke was giving and also the lawyer as well, like some of the statements that I read in articles, my initial thoughts was kind of seems like he's just out there to just save himself, preserve his reputation, make sure he doesn't get dragged into this. But after hearing from some of the Jodi Hildebrandt victims, I think it is possible that maybe Jodi Hildebrandt has more hand in this than we initially thought. And maybe, Kevin really was just some guy who allowed his wife to really take the control over the relationship and then ultimately, being a puppet for Jodi Hildebrandt. But again, I don't know. I'm just seeing, these are just observations that I'm just making. But I think there's still so much more that we need to wait for and to listen out for. And I think it's just really interesting because a lot of people want to know, what is Kevin Franke's role in all of this?
What does he say about Jodi Hildebrandt?
That she's manipulated him in conjunction with Ruby, that she's been kind of the spearhead toward essentially destroying his life and destroying his.
How did Jodi and Ruby get connected? Does Kevin know?
I don't know.
Kevin feels he was manipulated by Ruby. Is it just all the blame on Jodi?
I think it was a team effort, but with Jodi being the spearhead and creating a situation that's just caused all of this destruction of his family. Pardon the phrase, but he actually disconnected from any involvement with Connections a year and a half ago.
I wonder why.
And hasn't had anything to do with 8 passengers for even longer than that.
Now, as they're pulling the spotlight away from Kevin Franke and focusing on Ruby and Jodi, I think Jessi Weaver does a really good job at reeling it back in and asking questions about his client.
An isolated incident, because you and I both know that the Frankes have been under a close eye for quite some time. There were people who suspected that the kids were being abused or were treated too harshly. Your client was receiving criticism for quite some time over the parenting technique.
There hasn't ever been an allegation that Kevin Franke has ever physically abused his children.
Physical. Notice that the lawyer is going to keep saying physical because there has been allegations levied at Kevin and both Ruby as well, but they weren't like physical. It was mostly just, I don't know how to call it. It was like mental torture or something.
I think it's a subjective thing. Parenting, as everybody says, no one's ever written the perfect book on parenting. And so while
the accusations was, isolating the kids, taking their phones, their tablets away for a very long time, like months, even a year, or not even getting it back, or withholding food, or having a kid sleep in a beanbag for a couple of months, not having a bedroom, sleeping on the floor. These are just like, everyone parents differently. These are things that seem very severe for the punishments.
There were never any DCFS charges filed. There was never any criminal charges filed, and particularly, and I want to emphasize this, Kevin Franke has never been accused of physically abusing anyone, including his children, nor have there ever been any allegations that he was doing that.
So in other words, law enforcement has given no indication whatsoever that they are looking at your client as a potential criminal defendant.
They've pretty much been silent, haven't said one way or the other.
Jessi's like,
So for a lot of people who are looking at your client, making assumptions about what he may or may not have done, what is the message that you want out there?
Just what I keep repeating, that if you get to know Kevin, he is an incredibly decent guy. He's been a great father. He's provided for this entire family, even during his absence. He's working hard to do what he can to restore his reputation after it's been destroyed and damaged, and he's getting raked over the coals by all of this, when in fact he himself was to some degree a victim of these psychological and mental manipulations that were perpetrated against him and his family by Jodi.
I want to mention that if you guys want to listen to the full podcast, the website is right here. Sorry, but the YouTube channel is right here. Mormon Stories Podcast. I listened to it. I think I have like a little bit more left towards the tail end, but I thought it was really interesting. I listened to Jessi Hildebrandt's interview as well. I haven't listened to the podcast for this one yet, but I think it's just really interesting to hear from other survivors of Jodi Hildebrandt and their perspective. Now, I'm hoping they'll be able to be key witnesses and testify, like I said, under oath at trial against Jodi Hildebrandt. Now, I believe their story, and I'm absorbing all the information like a sponge. However, I do think it's really important to wait until the trials to happen, to have people testify under oath, to be direct examined and cross-examined as well. But I do want to share these stories because I do think that they are very interesting, and to see a correlation possibly between all the people that dealt with Jodi Hildebrandt. And at this point, I'm not clearing Kevin Franke yet. I'm going to wait until for more information to come out. But I thought this would be really interesting to share with you all. And yeah, I hope you guys have a good one.